Welcome to Washington Hospital Today, the program dedicated to sharing timely information about the community hospital that's been taking care of Washington Township Healthcare District residents since it opened in 1958. Washington Hospital Today is provided for the sole purpose of informing residents about healthcare topics and issues that have been covered during community forums, free health and wellness classes, or as part of educational sessions held during the district's open board meetings. This program is one more way that Washington Hospital helps empower you, the residents of the district, by providing information needed to make informed decisions about your health.
Today's presenter is Lorie Roffelsen. Lorie Roffelsen is a registered dietitian at the Washington Hospital Healthcare System. Lorie completed her studies at San Francisco State University. She is a prominent speaker for Washington Hospital's community outreach educational programs.
I wanted to say welcome to Washington Hospital, and my name is Lorie Roffelsen. I'm here tonight to talk to you about sodium and low sodium cooking and recommendations from American Heart Association for sodium intake for Americans. And I'm looking forward to hearing from the audience too, if you have information, suggestions, and ideas how you have been trying to maybe reduce sodium in your cooking at home. So tonight we're going to be talking about eating for heart health by reducing sodium. And watching sodium intake is just one aspect of eating heart healthy, but an important aspect because it does affect our blood pressure. So let's differentiate between sodium and salt, because we kind of hear both terms used. Sodium is a chemical element. It's necessary in the body. It's found in many foods as well as water. And the body, it's a necessary element. The body uses it in small amounts to help regulate blood pressure and blood volume. When you hear the term salt, that's referring to a chemical compound that's both sodium and chloride. So table salt is sodium chloride. It's found in nature in abundance, so it's usually mined and processed, and that's the product we buy at the grocery store. So how much sodium is in, regular or typical table salt? If you have just a quarter teaspoon of table salt, it has about 575 milligrams of sodium. A half teaspoon has over 1,000 milligrams. 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt has 725 milligrams. And if you're cooking or use a whole teaspoon, you've added 2,300 milligrams of sodium to your food, whatever you're cooking. Now, I've added some information about sea salt because I do get that question sometimes. Is sea salt better than table salt, or what's the difference? And there is some misinformation or misconception that sea salt is lower sodium than table salt. And weight for weight, sea salt has about the same amount of sodium as table salt. So some people prefer the taste maybe of sea salt, but if you're using it to reduce sodium, it's not really going to make very much difference in regards to the amount of sodium in it. So just always keep in mind, sea salt, whether you're using table salt or sea salt, they have about the same amount of sodium. The main difference is table salt is mined and processed, and that processing, they process it to give it that texture, fine texture that you can use in baking and cooking, and that does strip away some of the minerals that might naturally be in the salt. And so it may not have the same mineral content as sea salt. So, the processing will remove that. Sea salt is obtained directly through evaporation of seawater, and so all the mineral content should still be there because it's not processed. And so sea salt may retain some trace minerals like magnesium or potassium and calcium or other nutrients because it hasn't been processed. So that's the main difference between table salt and sea salt. And the taste, there may be a taste difference too. So, there's salt connoisseurs out there that do like to cook with different types of salt. When we see sodium used as a food ingredient in like processed food, it's used primarily as a food preservative. It's used to cure meats. Through the ages, salt was a very important commodity before we had refrigeration and ways to preserve foods other ways. It's also used as a flavor enhancer. It helps foods retain moisture, and so they're used in baking. So you'll see on packaging, you'll see the term salt, you'll see the term sodium nitrate, monosodium glutamate, sodium bicarbonate. Those are all different forms of sodium that might be in that food. So it's important to know what, if you're trying to, there's a few ways. You can look at the nutrition facts label that will tell you how much sodium is in the food. You can also look at the ingredients then to see what kind of sodium or what is added to make it higher sodium. The concern about sodium in the diet is that many studies and there's a lot of evidence out there that as sodium intake increases, our blood pressure also increases. And conversely, studies have shown that with consistent decreases in sodium intake, our blood pressure can decrease. Now, it's estimated that 90% of us will develop high blood pressure as we age. At some age, we may develop high blood pressure. By following a reduced sodium diet, that's been shown to decrease that or blunt that rise in blood pressure that may happen with age. So it is possible to affect our blood pressure even as we get older, and our risk for blood pressure going up also increases. Now, what is blood pressure? Blood pressure is a measurement of the force against the walls of the arteries as your heart is pumping blood through the body. When we have hypertension, that's a term to describe high blood pressure, meaning that the force of the blood against the artery walls is higher and at a pressure that can over time do damage to the walls of the arteries. And then I included for you some of the blood pressure numbers. So normal is less than 120 and less than 80 diastolic. And then we have pre-hypertensive ranges of 120 to 139 over 80 to 89. And then we have two different stages of hypertension, as well as blood pressure goals for people who already have hypertension or diabetes. And so it's important to, if you have hypertension, control it to reduce your risk over time of developing heart disease or increase your risk for stroke or other cardiovascular complications. Because over time, high blood pressure forces the heart to work harder. High blood pressure can damage blood vessels and organs, such as the heart and your kidneys. And so over time, high blood pressure can increase your risk for heart disease or stroke or kidney disease. High increased sodium intake, separate from high blood pressure, can also increase risk for gastric cancer. And studies have shown even when your blood pressure is controlled, high sodium intake may still do damage to arteries and other vessels. So even if your blood pressure is controlled, it is beneficial to, in general, try to limit sodium intake. So what are things we can do to control our blood pressure? Well, of course, exercise and activity is recommended. And for adults, we should be aiming for 150 minutes, which is about 2 hours and 30 minutes a week, of moderate intensity exercise like brisk walking, swimming, dancing, bicycling. Try to maintain a healthy weight, and if you're overweight, try to lose some weight. So we know that can also help us control our blood pressure. Limit alcohol consumption, that can raise your blood pressure. And what we're going to mainly talk about tonight, reduce sodium intake. So sodium in the diet, do you think it's mostly coming from our salt shaker at the table? No, it's actually the majority of sodium in the American diet is from processed foods, packaged foods, and restaurant food, not so much what we're using in our cooking at home. Although certainly there are some people who use high sodium sauces and may be heavy-handed at home, but the majority of our sodium comes from outside. About 12% occurs naturally in foods, and then another, or the balance, or 11%, is from salt added in cooking or at the table. So it's really important to, if you do buy processed or packaged foods at the store, to look at the labels and try to compare, because even if you're looking at canned beans, for example, 2 different manufacturers are going to have different amounts of sodium. So you can compare and try to find the lowest sodium option among, every product that you're shopping for. And, sodium is only one aspect. Maybe you're also comparing price, maybe you're also comparing fat. So there's a lot of things to consider, but, definitely look at the sodium. So sodium recommendations, the average American consumes about 3,500 milligrams of sodium every day. And recently, the recommendation from the American Heart Association was to limit your sodium intake to less than 2,300 milligrams per day. And then they said, if reduce further to less than 1,500 milligrams a day if you are a certain population. If you're older than 51, if you're African American, or if you already have hypertension or diabetes or kidney disease, because all of those things put you at higher risk. Well, after some statistics were looked at in 2009, the American Heart Association saw that about 70% of Americans fall into this higher risk population group. So they really recommend everybody try to follow less than 1,500 milligrams a day of sodium, which I don't think I'm not saying that's an easy recommendation to follow. I am going to show you a meal plan at the end that gives you an example of how you could, get pretty close. But they recommend that just because the studies have shown that at that level, blood pressure really does go down and does improve at that level of sodium intake. So let me give you some strategies to reduce sodium intake. Reduce processed food sources, meaning packaged meals, packaged crackers, packaged rice mixes, anything that has added seasoning and sodium in it. Cured meats. So of course you think instead of cured meats, look for fresh meats or fresh fish, canned vegetables and soups. Fortunately, there are more and more reduced sodium options in the grocery store. So if some people like canned vegetables, they're softer or they're easier to, cook with, or for whatever reason, that's what they're used to. Fortunately, there are more of those options there for people that want to buy those products. There is, better options in the frozen food aisle as well. Packaged convenience foods and snack foods, even there, you can find low sodium crackers, no salt added chips, those kind of choices if you're looking for, something that's reduced sodium. It could be a challenge to find something that you enjoy the taste of, and it also meets your sodium kind of goals. So might take a little bit of searching and trying, and or ask other people for advice what they've tried and liked in those different products. Again, read and compare food labels, because there is sometimes a difference between different manufacturers. Try to reduce salt in cooking. Also, not just salt in the form of table salt, but also in the form of sauces, fish sauces, soy sauce, oyster sauce. Those are very high sodium, and even in small amounts can add quite a bit of sodium to a dish. Also remember, over time, your taste buds will adjust to a lower sodium diet. So if you do it consistently for several weeks, you can adjust and enjoy less sodium in the cooking that you're doing. When possible, try to follow these habits when choosing foods out at restaurants. So if you go to a restaurant that has more of a cook-to-order menu, and you can ask them to make something for you without salt added. Or get things on the side that might be high sodium, such as gravies and sauces, and then you can, kind of control how much you might eat. So anytime you can sort of control those types of high sodium condiments and sauces, it's going to be better for you, because you might only want just a little bit or a taste compared to what they would add if they put it on for you. Now, the American Heart Association has what they call the Salty 6. They said these are the 6 top kind of common foods that are high sodium in the supermarket. And also, this is where you can make a difference if you do some comparing as far as which brand you're buying, and see if there's a difference in sodium. So breads and rolls, which most of us eat bread, right? We can't totally avoid bread. There is a big difference in sodium among different brands and different types. So kind of, look and compare, since that's probably a commodity we eat on a, regular basis. Not saying you have to choose low sodium bread, but definitely, look and compare among brands. If you choose to get cold cuts and cured meats, again, the sodium typically is pretty high in those types of foods, but you might be able to find reduced sodium or some naturally cured varieties that might be lower sodium. So again, you can look and see what you find. Pizza is one of those foods that can be very high sodium depending on what toppings you choose. So if you're choosing pepperoni and salami and sausage, you've got some very high sodium meats on there. But if you choose vegetables and maybe just cheese, then you've only really got one high sodium item on there, which is the cheese. So you can definitely make that one, a lower sodium choice. With poultry, a lot of the packaged, I'm not talking about like fresh chicken, but different types of chicken patties or breaded chicken, other kinds of chicken products you might see at the store will also vary a lot in sodium. So again, compare. With soups, canned soups can be very high sodium. So for those of you that like to make your own soup, that's great, because you can start with reduced sodium broth or make your own broth, versus if you rely on some canned soups, then again, look and compare, because they do have some heart healthy lines that are reduced sodium, or something you could fit into a reduced sodium diet on a regular basis. Sandwiches, again, if you're going to a sandwich shop or making sandwiches at home, a lot of it does, the sodium for that sandwich is really going to depend on the size of the bread, because of course the bread is going to have sodium. Remember, any condiments you add can add quite a bit of sodium if you have cheese and meat. So it all kind of adds up. So again, think about what you're putting on your sandwich, more vegetables, and maybe leave off cheese and just have the meat. There's ways you can kind of put it together so it's not as high in sodium. So this meal plan I'm going to show you, it's called the DASH eating plan. And the DASH diet was a study done at several universities and hospitals across the United States to see at what level of sodium intake they could impact the blood pressure in these groups of people that participated in the study. And what came out of the DASH diet was, with a high intake of this, following this meal plan and avoiding the, high sodium foods, the people who had the best improvement in blood pressure were consuming around the 1,500 milligrams of sodium per day. And that's kind of where this recommendation for 1,500 milligrams of sodium per day came from. So the DASH diet emphasizes including certain foods and avoiding other foods. The emphasis is on including foods that are good sources of potassium, calcium, and magnesium, because those are chemical elements in the body that have been shown to help excrete sodium from the kidneys. So by eating a diet that's rich in those nutrients, it kind of helps you excrete excess sodium that might be in the body. It also encourages intake of whole grains, fruits, and vegetables. Fruits and vegetables are naturally low or have zero sodium. Fat-free or low-fat milk products, which are good sources of calcium, and nuts and seeds and legumes, which are good sources of the potassium and the magnesium that they were trying to emphasize in the study. And then at the same time, they asked the participants in the study to limit intake of salt and sugar, fats, and just kind of generally eat a pretty healthy diet, which they did, and their blood pressure improved very much. So the DASH eating plan, it really it crowds out junk food, because if you try to eat everything that's on the plan, you don't really have room to eat much else in the day, because there's a lot of servings of fruits and vegetables and your grain group. Now I would say for women, because we tend to need less calories, you would probably eat closer to 6 servings a day of grains. So I have a range here, 6 to 8. Men maybe would eat more like 8 servings a day. For us, women in the room, probably more like 6 servings a day. Vegetables, because they're low calorie and they're good for you, you could eat the higher range if you want to. Fruits, again, for women, maybe 4 servings a day. And again, these are general recommendations. If you have other health conditions that, this might not fit for everybody, but for a healthy person it's a good, just general eating plan. Fat-free or low-fat milk, about 2 to 3 servings per day. Lean protein. So this plan does not, it's kind of I'd say a low cholesterol, or, definitely a heart healthy plan overall too, because it recommends also kind of limiting meat to only about 5 or 6 ounces per day. So lean protein 6 or less, meaning that means about 6 ounces per day. To get in some of the magnesium and potassium we need, it suggests having some seeds and nuts and also legumes on a regular basis throughout the week. Maybe not every day, but definitely try to include them on a regular basis. And then limiting fats and oils, and making sure they're heart healthy types of oils, like liquid oils, canola, or olive oil. And really limiting sweets and added sugars. So some other studies have shown that even added sugars can raise blood pressure. So it's not going to hurt us, if we're watching our blood pressure, to also kind of limit our intake of added sugars and sweets. So on the DASH eating plan, I just wanted to also include what they consider a serving, because they said, if you're eating 6 servings a day of grains, What does that mean? So one slice of bread, typical slice of like sandwich bread, is a serving, an ounce of cereal, or half of a cup of cooked pasta or cooked rice. For vegetables, a serving would be 1 cup of raw vegetable or half a cup of cooked vegetable. Fruits, like a typical medium apple or smallish orange would be a serving. A 1/4 cup of dried fruit, half a cup of fresh, like cut fruit, or a half a cup of juice if you take juice. In the dairy group, a serving of dairy would be like a cup of milk or yogurt, or 1.5 ounces of cheese, which is, not very much. That's a pretty small amount of cheese, maybe 1 slice of cheese. Lean meat, 6 ounces or less. You certainly could have some, vegetarian meals in there as well. Nuts, seeds, and legumes, they're talking about a half cup of cooked beans of any kind, 2 tablespoons of seeds of any kind, like sesame seeds or sunflower seeds, or 2 tablespoons of peanut butter or any kind of a nut butter. And then if you include oils, a teaspoon of oil or a teaspoon of margarine, 1 tablespoon of mayo, or 2 tablespoons of salad dressing is considered a fat. And then, of course, added sugars. Like a serving of added sweets or sugar would be like a tablespoon of sugar, table sugar, or jam or jelly. So here's a one-day menu, but you can see how the sodium, like what foods really add sodium in each meal that I'm going to show you. Breakfast, it's the granola bar, right, which is a packaged processed food, has sodium added, and the dairy from the yogurt and the milk. So if you just keep in mind, even dairy products usually have a significant amount of sodium. Something like cottage cheese can have quite a bit. So always, look, if you're watching your sodium intake, also look at things like cottage cheese, because again, you might be able to find a different product or brand that has less. So here we have lunch, which is a sandwich, pretty simple. You'd think, oh, that's not going to have a lot of sodium, but remember, regular bread is going to have a sodium content. Usually it's around 150 milligrams per slice or so. I mean, that's like a typical bread. And because I added a tablespoon of Dijon mustard, which is pretty high sodium, which is okay, it might still fit for the day, but just keep in mind any condiments you put on your sandwich or food may add quite a bit of sodium. And then at dinner, this is all home cooked food. It's a baked fish that has like a spice rub on it, but it doesn't have salt in the rub. So you can see there's really not a lot of sodium in the main entree. There's the most just from the wheat roll, which is the bread at the meal. And then at the snack time, there's a milk. And this is actually a dash eating plan. So the total for the day, if you were to eat everything that was on this plan, is about 1,672 milligrams sodium, which is close to the 1,500 milligrams recommended, and about 2,000 calories a day. And not bad in cholesterol, 171 milligrams. So it's definitely doable to get close, but you've made most of your food at home, and try to be careful with things like condiments. We could have definitely got under 1,500 milligram if we used less Dijon mustard or omitted maybe one of the bread servings or something. We would be under 1,500. So again, keep in mind when your heart health, if you're trying to shop heart healthy, read nutrition labels and compare. In general, try to choose foods that don't have a lot of added ingredients, because when manufacturers add ingredients, it's usually sodium and fat and sugar. For kind of a healthy range for sodium intake. Try to choose foods that have less than 300 milligrams sodium per serving. Fill up on fiber. So try to choose cereals that have at least 5 grams of fiber per serving, breads with at least 2 grams fiber per serving. And if you want to see some recipes and other cooking and shopping ideas, this website at the American Heart Association called Delicious Decisions has a lot of suggestions there. And then I have also included at the end some websites that have also recipes and more information on reducing sodium intake and the DASH diet. Well, thank you very much for coming out, and I hope you'll stay and taste our samples.